Hello friends, this video is about the autonomic nervous system and it will cover two topics, nervous system and anatomy of ANS. So before discussing each of these topics separately, we must know what is autonomic nervous system. Basically, our body is made up of two systems that working together in order to perform the body functions in a coordinated way. These two systems are endocrine system and the autonomic nervous system. The endocrine system depends on the body-borne hormones. They produce their actions by these hormones, while the ANS, on the other hand, actually depends on the conduction of electrical impulses. These electrical impulses move down over the nerve fibers and terminate at the effector cells, where they produce their action by the release of specific neuromediators, or we can say that neurotransmitters. These are actually the chemicals. We will discuss it in our later videos. So move to our next slide. So first discuss the actually classification of the nervous system. The nervous system is composed of two parts, that is number one, central, and which is composed of brain and spinal cord, while the second one is the peripheral. So peripheral, as the name indicates, it is something associated with the peripheries of that are present in the peripheries of central nervous system. Periphery is composed of different clusters of neurons. And what is neuron? This will be covered in our next slide. So first focus on this basic divisions. As we see in this slide, the peripheral, composed of further two systems, is further divided into somatic and autonomic nervous system. So periphery is, these two classification of peripheries depend on the direction of the message. Actually, there are two neurons, afferent and efferent. Afferent neurons are those which are involved in carrying the message towards the CNS, while efferent neurons are the neurons that are involved in carrying the message away from the CNS towards the different organs. And depending on their innervations, these are classified as somatic or autonomic. So if the efferent neurons are innervating into the skeletal muscles and they control the contraction and relaxations of these muscles, then they form a somatic nervous system. So this actually is the voluntary control that is actually under our own control. But the autonomic nervous system is such type of nervous system that is actually regulating the everyday requirements of our vital bodily functions without the conscious participation of our mind. So it is composed of the efferent neurons that are innervating into the smooth muscles of the viscera, cardiac muscles, in exocrine glands, and in the vasculature. So therefore they are responsible for controlling digestion, cardiac output, blood flow, and different glandular secretions. Now let's see the classification of somatic. Somatic is divided into sensory input and the motor input. So this is another way of defining the efferent and afferent neurons. Actually, the afferent, which are carrying message towards CNS, is actually carrying the message from the sensory organs, which are responsible for sensing something, sensing the stimulus. So these are carrying message from sensory organs towards the CNS, and then from CNS, when the message is interpret and the response is to be carried out by our body. So the message is conveyed from the CNS towards the effector cell through the motor neurons, or we can say that message conveying is actually the motor output that controls the skeletal muscles. So in this slide you can see the sympathetic and parasympathetic control what is sympathetic and parasympathetic. This will be discussed in our next topic. So let's see that what is neuron. Neuron are basically the nerve cells. These are the brain cells. The different cells in our brain are known as nerve cells. So these are the functional unit of brain cell, as the nephrons are the functional unit of kidneys. In the similar way, nerve cells are the functional unit of our brain. Neurons, unlike other body cells, they cannot regenerate, they cannot reproduce, even they cannot be replaced once they died. So let's see the structure of neuron. The neuron is composed of the nucleus, which is also known as it is present in a cell body, which is also known as soma, and it carries a message from this nucleus towards the axon terminal. The second part of the neuron is actually the axon. Axon, you can see that is a thread-like structure that is moving away from the axon, and these some branches of thread-like branches are the dendrites that are moving towards the nucleus. So these are responsible for carrying the message towards the cell body, and axon is responsible for carrying the message away from the cell body. The axon is actually covered with this myelin sheet, and the function of myelin sheet is actually to transmit the impulse quickly and efficiently. So here are the types of neurons. Sensory neurons, we have discussed in our previous slide that these are the neurons carrying message towards the CNS, and motor neurons that are carrying message towards the effector organ from the CNS. Interneurons are actually present in the brain and spinal cord. So these are the structure and types of cell body. So these node of Ranevers are some the distance or the gap in these axon, and these are also responsible for carrying the message efficiently, and they are responsible for the quick transmission of the electrical impulse. So let's see the difference between the afferent neurons and efferent neurons. Most of us are a little bit confused in the difference of these neurons and what the function they perform actually. So let's see the difference between these neurons. So afferent neurons are actually carrying the message from effector organ towards the CNS, while efferent neurons carrying the message from CNS to the effector organ. Afferent neurons are important for the reflex regulation, while efferent neurons make two systems, which is somatic and ANS, that we have earlier discussed in our second slide. That somatic system is the system when the efferent neurons innervate in the skeletal muscles, while ANS is the system that is formed when the efferent neurons innervate in to the smooth muscles of viscera, cardiac vasculature, exocrine glands, and they are involved in involuntary actions. Another difference is that the signal, the brain, actually the afferent neurons are send signal to the brain to cause the efferent branch of the system to respond. Efferent neurons are also known as the motor neurons, and afferent neurons are also known as the sensory neurons. There are two types of efferent neurons actually. Afferent neuron is only composed of a single neuron, while efferent neuron is actually composed of two parts, preganglionic neuron and the postganglionic neuron. So preganglionic, as the name indicates, it is something present before the ganglions, and postganglionic neurons, that is present something after the ganglia. Now see that what are ganglia. Ganglia are actually the aggregations of the nerve cell bodies that are located outside the CNS in the peripheral nervous system. So these ganglia function as a relay stations between the preganglionic neuron and the second nerve cell, the postganglionic neuron. The major difference between the preganglionic and postganglionic neuron is that the preganglionic neuron is myelinated while the postganglionic neuron is non-myelinated, and its terminate on the effector organs such as smooth muscle cells of the viscera, cardiac muscles and exocrine glands, while the preganglionic neuron ends at the ganglia. So in this picture we can see easily the division of this pre and post ganglionic neurons. Like you can see that these are the cell bodies that are present inside the spinal cord, and the neurons that are coming out of these cell bodies out of the spinal cord and innervate into some of the ganglia present outside the CNS. These are the preganglionic efferent neurons, right? Then another second neuron coming out of these ganglions and innervate into the effector organ. So these are forming the postganglionic efferent neurons. Sometimes the organ, sometimes this prevertebral ganglia are present inside the organ itself. So this will be discussed in our next presentation. So don't confuse it with the paravertebral ganglia that are moving parallel to the spinal cord. So these are the paravertebral ganglia and these are the prevertebral ganglia. So prevertebral ganglia are quite different from the paravertebral ganglia, and this will be discussed in our next presentation. So let's see the autonomic efferent pathway and somatic efferent pathway through a diagram. So in this diagram you can easily see that first the somatic efferent pathway. Here is the spinal cord, the gray matter of the spinal cord, and a neuron is coming out of it. This is a somatic motor neuron. Motor means that it is carrying, so the name is defining its all function, that somatic, which means it's gonna innervate into a skeletal muscle, while the motor neuron, which means that it is carrying message from the spinal cord towards the effector organ. So this is myelinated, and in this way it innervates into the skeletal muscle, that is the target tissue in this case, and here it is gonna release some neurotransmitter at the synaptic terminal. So synaptic terminal is actually the gap between the effector organ and the neuron ending. Secondly, we can say that the autonomic efferent pathway. So here we can say that the neuron coming out of the gray matter, and it innervates into some central neuron synapses with the ganglionic neuron, with the ganglia present outside somewhere in the periphery. Then another neuron coming out of this innervate into the target effector smooth muscle cell, where axon does not necessarily end at synapse. In fact, it just release a neurotransmitter over there and continues to further. So this is the major difference between the autonomic efferent and somatic efferent pathway. Once again, I am going to repeat this whole classification. So let's again move towards the second slide and let's discuss it briefly. nervous system that is composed of actually two systems, central nervous system and peripheral nervous system. Central nervous system is composed of brain and spinal cord only, while the peripheral nervous systems is actually the system that is composed of neurons, and based upon their neuron function, we have classified it into somatic and autonomic nervous systems. Actually, there are two types of neurons. One neuron that is responsible for carrying the message from the sensory organ towards the CNS, while the second neuron, which are responsible for carrying the message from CNS towards the effector organ. So based upon the effector organ, it has been classified into somatic and autonomic nervous system. Somatic nervous system is in the case when the neuron innervates into the skeletal muscles, while autonomic nervous system is in the case when the neuron innervates into the smooth muscles of viscera and cardiac muscles, vasculatures, and the other glands. So autonomic nervous system is actually involuntary in action, while somatic is voluntary in action. So I hope after this detailed discussion, you people might not have some confusion regarding this classification of nervous system. So where are the preganglionic autonomic fibers originate? These actually originate in the midbrain and hindbrain and in the upper thoracic to the fourth sacral levels of the spinal cord. So these are the locations from where the preganglionic autonomic fibers originate. While the autonomic ganglia are located in head, neck, and abdomen. Chains of autonomic ganglia are also moving parallel right and left side of the spinal cord. So the origin of the preganglionic autonomic fiber and the presence of autonomic ganglia actually help us to distinguish the sympathetic and parasympathetic division of the autonomic system. So this is very important, that origination of the preganglionic fibers and the location of the autonomic ganglia actually define us that which is gonna be the parasympathetic system and which is gonna be the sympathetic system.
So these are some visceral affected organs, which are the heart, the visceral
smooth muscles, which includes the blood vessels, bronchioles, where they cause the blood vessels to contract and relax, and in the similar way the bronchioles to contract and relax. They also innervate in the uterus, alimentary canal, iris of the eye, and endometrium, which are the muscles of the uterus. So next is some of the glands that are also innervated by the autonomic nervous system, and these are the pancreas, salivary glands, secretory glands of the alimentary canal, nose and trachea, sweat glands, and adrenal glands, and liver as well. The most important fact about the visceral effector organ which we have been identified is that they all exhibit automaticity, which means that they work their own. They do not depend on the autonomic nervous impulse or the motor neurons to perform, to cause them to perform. This is why that this is the reason actually that when the heart is beating and has been removed from a person who has pronounced brain damage, it still beat when it has been removed from that person, and when it is implanted in another individual, it start again working. So this is actually explaining its automaticity, which means that they do not need of the autonomic nervous system. So if they do not require this autonomic nervous system, then why do these neurons are present in viscera? So the answer to this question is that they are responsible for controlling the rate of the function of these autonomic nervous impulses in the visceral effector organ. So they will control, they will speed up the function or speed down or slow down their rate. So this is all about the ANS So till now, it is clear from our presentation that the peripheral nervous system composed of two neurons, afferent and efferent. Depending on the organ the efferent neurons are innervating, we have been classified it into somatic and autonomic nervous system. And again, depending on the presence of the autonomic ganglia and the origination of preganglionic fibers, we have been classified the ANS into parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system. So we will discuss the parasympathetic and sympathetic systems in our next video. Hopefully this video will be very fruitful for all of you, and I hope you understand these concepts. If you have any queries regarding this video, you can comment in the comment section below, and if you like it, then don't forget to press the like button and subscribe my channel. Thank you.